Tens of thousands continue to visit the Ansan Olympic Memorial Hall, paying respects to the victims of the sunken Sewol-ho ferry as a grief-stricken nation mourns their losses. Emergency Task Force dispatches the joint efforts of Coast Guard, Navy, and civilian divers and rescue equipment, including the use of a diving bell. U.S. President Barack Obama arrives in Seoul this Friday. Bilateral talks are scheduled with Korean President Park Geun-hye, while President Obama is expected to express his condolences to the victims and families of the ferry disaster. As families struggle with grief and uncertainty, relief supplies flood in from around the nation with helping hands on site. On Korea Today, Friday, April 25th, 2014.
From Arirang News, this is Korea Today.
Thank you for tuning in. You're watching Korea Today. On the 10th day since the Sewol-ho ferry capsized and sank off the southwestern coast of Korea, rescuers will focus on the third and fourth decks of the ferry to find the missing passengers, all 121 of them.
This time, a diver bell will be deployed to allow divers to stay underwater a bit longer, so hopefully they'll be able to get to more passengers inside the sunken ferry.
That's right. And in the meantime, we're now going to first head over to the Ansan Olympic Memorial Hall, where mourners have been paying their last respects. Now, visitors affected both directly and indirectly have been visiting the memorial throughout the day. We're going to connect live to our Kim Ji-yeon, who is outside the memorial hall. Ji-yeon?
Hello, Yang. It's 10th day since the ferry sank. Funerals of more than 20 high school students were held today. Among them was a 17-year-old Russian-Korean Sewol-ho Vyacheslav, whose dream it was to become a professional swimmer and to swim for the Korean national team. Inside the hall behind me, there are portraits of 65 high school students and teachers. It was quiet earlier this morning, but more people are coming here now to pay their respects. Over the past several days, around 44,000 people have said their last goodbyes to those who lost their lives in the sinking. The whole nation is mourning for the victims.
I know it's very painful for you, but we will be supporting you. I heard you've hardly been eating. Please take care of yourself.
No words will console you, but please know that many people are feeling the pain with you and crying with you. I wish the students will go to heaven and live happily.
Now, Ji-yeon, I understand that the memorial remained open throughout the night. Can visitors pay their respects at any time of the day?
Yes, Young. It's open 24 hours a day, except for certain times due to maintenance purposes. It will also be open throughout the weekend. There's another group memorial altar in the southwestern city of Mokpo, which is closer to the accident site. And another in the city of Ulsan. Memorial altars are set up at plazas near Dongbu and Pukbu, Ulsan metropolitan city. In Australia, a memorial altar will be set up starting Monday until May 2nd at the Western Croydon Park from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. local time. More than 56,000 people have visited a site online to mourn the people, the high school students and teachers. This was Kim Ji-yeon live at the Ansan Olympic Memorial Hall.
Now, while mourners are grieving over the untimely deaths in many altars set up across the country and the world, over in Jindo Island, rescuers are still fighting against the strong tides until the final passenger is accounted for. For the latest, we go live to our Song Ji-san standing by at Pyeongmokhang Harbor, the nearest point of land to the accident site. Ji-san, what can you tell us?
The search and rescue operation goes on this Friday, even though the conditions may not be as favorable as it has been over the past few days. The currents will get stronger and even rain is in the forecast for the weekend. 22 more bodies have been recovered from Thursday to early dawn this Friday morning, and the number of dead now exceeds the number of survivors at 181 dead and 171 survivors, and 121 remain missing. The divers will continue their search on the 3rd floor where the cafeteria is, and on the 4th floor of the ship where the cabins of the most Danwon High School students were located, especially focusing on the center of the deck. Authority will also deploy a diving bell, a chamber that could be used as a base and transportation of divers underwater, to beef up the number of divers that can engage in search operation and also stay longer. The search will continue as parents of the missing have requested the ferry not to be lifted out of water until every body is recovered from underwater. 5 cranes are on standby, but no one assumes that the lift will take place anytime soon.
Now, Chisan, it seems like tensions between the families of the missing and authorities involved in the search operations have passed the boiling point. How are things looking over there now?
This all-out efforts comes after these desperate and angry parents have protested against the authorities and the rescue operations here, casting doubt whether everything is being done to save their children still underwater. And they actually sit down with the Maritime Minister as well as the Chief Commissioner of the Coast Guard from 5 p.m. Thursday afternoon, when well into overnight, questioning them for hours about where there was enough was being done to save and search for the survivors. So parents want more diving distance lines to be installed on the 4th deck of the sunken ferry where most students are expected to be, and they're demanding more civilian divers be brought into operation. Parents want them back in the water as they think there are not enough divers out there to recover the bodies of their children. Some parents are reportedly out on the waters on the barge where divers engage in search operation and are demanding each and every process is reported to them immediately on site. The Maritime Minister and Coast Guard Chief will stay on site to direct the operations and assist the families as the parents requested until the last student is brought back on shore. This has been Song Ji-sun reporting live from Paengmokang Harbor in Jindo.
Now, the families of those who are still missing demanded that search crews finish search operations by Thursday. That was last night. But with 121 people still missing, the search is quickly becoming an extended one. Many of the family members were understandably, as you heard from Song Ji-sun, frustrated, and some commotion was reported from the Jindo Gymnasium. Let's connect live to our Connie Lee at the gym. Connie, what's going on there right now?
Well, hey, Young. Well, so far it's been a pretty calm morning on this Friday here at the Jindo Gymnasium. Things seem to have settled down from last night. Now, late yesterday, we did have commotion break out amongst the families of those still missing. Now, they broke out in anger and in frustration as they stormed out of the gym and onto a bus that was headed to the Paengmokang Harbor, or the closest area to the sunken ferry site and the area where our reporter Ji-sun is. Now, they went to that place to join the protest there and confront search officials. Family members had asked officials to finish search operations by Thursday, but by late yesterday, more than 120 were still missing. Family members here are basically saying the officials are not doing their best in finding their loved ones underwater. Young.
Now, Connie, hope for survivors are diminishing as it's been more than a week. Now, some family members have given up hope and are hoping to find the bodies before decomposition actually sets in. Connie?
Right. Well, the families here have been living here practically for the past 10 days now. So as you can imagine, they're exhausted and just tired of waiting to hear any word on any bodies. Now, the family members here, though, are trying not to lose hope. More than 120 people still unaccounted for. So that means more than 120 families still have loved ones not confirmed dead yet. Now, I've been talking with a father here who is looking for his 17-year-old son who attended Danwon High School, or the school where most of the ferry passengers were from. He says that from his son's homeroom class of 34 students, only one student has survived. Now that is the reality here. The father here is with his close friends and neighbors, and they all say that they won't leave this gym until his son is found. Reporting live from the Jindo Gymnasium, this has been Connie Lee.
In the meantime, questions continue to mount over the crew's actions or inaction that caused the ferry to capsize and go underwater. Authorities are leaving no stones unturned. For any updates on the investigation, we'll go straight to Shin Se-min, who is standing by with this story. Se-min, about the cause of the sinking now, are we any closer to finding out what happened?
Well, not really. I can only tell you that the investigators are looking into all possibilities at this point. Now, prosecutors are looking into another similar vessel, the Ohamanaho ferry, also owned by the Cheongjin Marine Company, the operator of the sunken Sewol-ho, to find possible clues. A number of possible causes have been raised over the past several days, but 3 have emerged as the most probable scenarios as of now. One is that the Sewol-ho ferry made a sudden right turn as it attempted to do a P-turn, and experts say the helm was turned back again, but the ferry didn't come back to its original position, possibly causing operations to freeze momentarily. Now, this is when another factor comes in. The 3,500 tons of freight on board was not secured properly, and this caused all the containers and vehicles in the cargo hold to list to one side, tilting it even further with the concentrated weight on just one side. And even the freight was found to have well exceeded the recommended weight due to the light inspection done by the officials. And lastly, there's also the possibility that renovations made to the ferry to maximize the number of passengers and cargo made it unstable. Now, the advisory panel of 13 experts will meet for the first time at around 3 p.m. Korea time to figure out what exactly went wrong. Professors, marine and shipping experts and representatives from the shipping industry will attempt to reconstruct the accident using a mock-up of the ferry.
So many factors to consider and look into there. Now, Semin, investigators are holding more criminal charges against the surviving crew of the ferry. What's the latest we have on that?
So far, it looks like all 15 rescued crew members, including the captain Lee Jun-seok, that escaped the ferry will face criminal charges. 11 have already been charged with negligent homicide while violating maritime law, with the remaining 4 under investigation as suspects. Comments made by some of the crew members are causing quite a stir as well. One testified that crew members, including himself, were in a room less than just 10 meters away from where the passenger cabins were right before they fled the ship, which clearly suggests that they did not follow the standard protocol to help passengers escape. And that's all from me now, and back to you in the studio.
After wrapping up his stay in Tokyo, U.S. President Barack Obama will arrive in Seoul this Friday on the second leg of his Asia tour. Now, with the entire nation mourning the loss of so many young lives in the Sewol-ho ferry accident, Obama is expected to focus his 2-day visit on expressing his condolences and grief to the victims and their families. He's also scheduled to sit down for bilateral talks with President Park Geun-hye later today in the afternoon, where soured South Korea-Japan relations and North Korea's continuous nuclear threats will likely top the agenda. Let's take a look at this next report to find out what further significance his trip has.
U.S. President Barack Obama is scheduled to visit Korea this Friday. The focus of his visit, which was originally going to center on culture, is expected to change to sharing condolences and mourning losses from the Sewol-ho ferry accident.
I can certainly expect that this will be a big part of his trip and how he addresses the South Korean people while he's there. And not just as the president of a country that has an alliance with South Korea, but as a father of 2 young daughters.
This is the 4th official visit to Korea by President Obama. Although it's not his first meeting with President Park Geun-hye, it is his first visit to Korea since she took office.
Well, President Obama will assure that the United States is firmly behind President Park Geun-hye's policy toward North Korea, which is termed trust process politics. And also, the U.S. is firmly determined to denuclearize North Korean nuclear weapons.
Meanwhile, in his visit to Japan, President Obama, stepping out of his previous neutral stance on territorial disputes between Tokyo and Beijing, expressed his support for Japan.
The threats posed by North Korea and the nuclearization that's been taking place in that country. But because of the strong cooperation between our countries, I am confident that we will continue to make progress.
On Friday, President Obama will begin his official schedule with a visit to the War Memorial of Korea. Then he will head to Gyeongbokgung Palace to experience Korea's traditional culture. One of the reasons why culture was to be emphasized during his visit was because of the return of Korea's ancient royal seals. During the Korean War, these cultural assets were said to have been stolen and held at the Department of Homeland Security in the US. Koreans have been campaigning to have the seals returned as soon as possible.
We organized a campaign at the White House for a petition that reached 100,000 signatures aimed at retrieval of Korea's ancient seals. Also, there was a bell tolling ceremony at the Boshingak Pavilion, as well as a street campaign to urge the U.S. to return our cultural treasures. The return of ancient seals by President Obama is meaningful in that it will send an exemplary model for countries whose cultural heritages are stolen.
On Friday afternoon, President Obama will sit down with President Park Geun-hye for a bilateral meeting, followed by a joint press conference. The two leaders are expected to reaffirm their commitment to strengthening the Korea-US alliance and the denuclearization of North Korea. With ongoing signs that North Korea may conduct a fourth nuclear test, President Obama's message to North Korea is expected to be one of the focal points of his visit. Ahead of his visit, President Park on Wednesday asked Chinese President Xi Jinping during a phone conversation to dissuade North Korea from conducting a nuclear test. In a meeting with business leaders on Saturday morning, President Obama will discuss the Korea-US Free Trade Agreement and economic issues of concern between the two countries.
His visit has a very economic national goal as well for the United States because he is under pressure by American businesses. His visit at this moment would give some sort of long kind of pressure to the Korean economy to open more market to American businesses.
Good morning. Let's run through the front pages of your newspapers. And the families of the sunken ferry's victims remain stricken with grief as well as anger. We'll begin with the top story here on Gyeongyang Shinmun. And the headline says, "How much longer do we have to wait?" Now, resentful relatives of the students missing from the Sewol-ho ferry surrounded the Oceans and Fisheries Minister Lee Ju-young yesterday, preventing him from leaving the area where families have been waiting for word on their loved ones for more than a week now. And in the sub-headline, it says this was the latest expression of fury and desperation by the families to government officials, while they also demanded that the search continue throughout the night as they were worried that operations are slowing down. Many of the families were crying throughout those moments of tension, and the Coast Guard was saying they are trying their very best. In the meantime, in this picture, it's a picture of students at Danwon High School offering a silent tribute and prayer for their lost schoolmates on their first day back to school since the tragic incident. And going over to Joseon-ilbo, we'll have a look at this headline here regarding Yu Byung-an, the de facto owner of Cheongjin Marine Company that owned the Sewol-ho ferry. I did mention that Yu Byung-an has been working as a professional photographer on Wednesday too. Now this headline says Yu Byung-an's art photo pieces at almost $50,000 US each, and company affiliates buy almost $20 million worth. So quite bizarrely, Yu is indeed a renowned nature photographer working under the pseudonym Ahe, whose work has been exhibited across the globe. And in the sub-headlines, they mentioned that there's suspicion on some 400 photos taken abroad that may have been forced purchases by affiliate companies. Now, as the investigators delve deeper into Cheongjin Marine Company, the paper says Yu is suspected to have been behind the irregularities that led to the lax operations of the vessel. And let's go to Donghwa-ilbo here to the side regarding U.S. and Japan. Now, the headline says the U.S.-Japan Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement falls through, a joint statement postponed. Now, the two nations were trying to iron out the details of the joint statement to be released after the Obama and Abe meeting held yesterday in Japan. However, no TPP agreement in principle was reached. Now, ordinarily, joint statements released after summit talks have been all but finalized prior to the actual meeting. But the latest meeting was particularly unusual because no joint statement was released right away, and also because negotiations resumed even after the two leaders had already met. Let's go on to 중앙일보 here, the top story regarding the U.S. President Obama. In a written interview with the daily 중앙일보, the U.S. President said economic cooperation between Korea and China is welcome, but Korea's security foundation should be based on the U.S. And that's exactly what the headline is saying here. And in the sub-headlines right here, they mentioned that Obama also said North Korea will have to expect strict sanctions if it conducts a nuclear test again. Also, in the meantime, he offered his condolences for the Sewol-ho ferry disaster, saying he is deeply saddened by the tragedy as a parent of children. And finally, going over to the Korea Economic Daily regarding some business news here. This headline says, yellow light for the economy with shock of Sewol-ho ferry disaster. Now, the domestic economy may inevitably suffer a setback in the second quarter as private consumption cools down drastically with the sinking of Sewol-ho. Now, consumer spending already slowed in the first 3 months of this year, and given that, its economic growth could retreat 0.2 to 0.3 percentage points in the second quarter when the aftershocks of the ferry disaster will be priced in. And that was a look at your newspaper headlines for this Friday, and coming up are the stock numbers from Thursday.
Now, the window of opportunity seems to be closing as the tides and currents are once again working against the recovery efforts.
That's right. And for more on the weather conditions in the Jindo area and the conditions that they're expecting, we now go over to Chun Song-cho. Song-cho, good morning.
Good morning, guys. The search and rescue team faces a big challenge again as the currents around the site of the accident have begun to pick up in speed after entering a transition phase where tides change from neap to spring. The currents will really gain momentum in speed over the weekend, going up from 1.8 meters per second today to as fast as 2.4 in 1 week. So underwater operations should be done as much as possible today before the weather becomes even rougher. Now, these are the predicted times for the turning of tide when the currents flow at their slowest, less than 0.5 meters per second. Now, if you look at the details of today's weather lookout around Jindo Island, it just shows how the conditions are becoming worse. Though very subtle, you'll notice the figures go up as we go further into the day, which have stayed pretty much the same for the past few days. The wind speed increases up to 7 meters per second. And waves up to 1 meter in height. And by Sunday, the waves will rise as high as 3 meters with strong gusts at 16 meters per second of speed, rocking the surface of the waters. So you see the scope of how severe this weekend's conditions are going to be. And not only that, nationwide precipitation is expected on Sunday and Monday. A high pressure system over Japan is what's creating relatively clear and sunny conditions today. But as it moves eastward, a trough of low pressure from the west will overtake the system by tomorrow. This will lead to more and more clouds forming, and by the time we reach tomorrow evening, Jeollado provinces and Jeju will begin to receive light drizzles, which will turn into nationwide showers the next day. Temperatures across the peninsula remain above the annual average, but will slightly decrease after the Sunday's rainfall. Today, Seoul's highs are 27, Jeju the coolest at 23, and Daegu and Daejeon the warmest at 28 degrees Celsius. Watch out for the big difference between the highs and lows. Some areas will be affected by fog and particulate matter, and the area is quite dry at the moment, so please keep that in mind as well. This is all for me with the weather update.
Let's now turn our attention elsewhere to find out what's making headlines around the world. For that, we have Eunice Kim standing by at the news center. Eunice, now, while Korea is scrambling to come to terms with what happened 9 days ago, the situation in Ukraine seems to be worsening. Tell us more.
That's right, Min-jung. Good morning. Tensions are escalating in Ukraine as Ukrainian troops have killed up to 5 pro-Russian rebels at a separatist military stronghold in the east. Russia has responded with army drills near its border as Russian President Vladimir Putin warns of consequences should Kiev use force against its own people. The deadly clashes do come as Kiev relaunched its anti-terrorist offensive earlier this week in an apparent breakdown of the Geneva Agreement to de-escalate tensions. You'll remember the foreign ministers of Ukraine, Russia, the EU, and U.S. had agreed on a series of steps to take to pull Ukraine back from an all-out civil war last week, but separatists have rejected it, instead calling for the Kiev government to step down. Kiev has accused Moscow of supporting terrorism at the state level.
And in the meantime, there are still families who are waiting to hear the news of their loved ones. We're, of course, talking about the search for Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, still missing, along with the 239 people on board.
That's right, Min-jung. We are nearing the 50th day of search efforts. That's 50, and that is tomorrow. And still no big breaks, only disappointing leads. The underwater drone Bluefin 21 is reported to have scanned more than 90% of its designated ocean floor. And this morning, we're hearing from Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak, who told CNN that he and his government are not yet ready to say all is lost, that they need physical evidence to hand to the next of kin who have demanded it to back up any conclusion. The Prime Minister admitted that his government had made mistakes in the process, but that he was proud of the coalition of 26 countries that Malaysia had led in this search. He also said a government report could be released to the public next week on the plane's disappearance. That has already been passed on to the United Nations.
And finally, let's turn to the Middle East, where troubled peace talks between Israel and Palestine have seemed to have hit a snag. Now, Israel has pulled out indefinitely. Tell us more about this story.
Right. This is still a very much developing story. Israel has suspended the U.S. moderated peace talks this one day after Palestine's Mahmoud Abbas government reached a surprise unity pact with rival Hamas. Now, an official statement said the government of Israel will not hold negotiations with a government that is backed by a terror organization that calls for Israel's destruction. Now, Israel, the U.S., and the EU do regard Hamas as a terrorist organization, in part for the near daily attacks it has targeted at Israel from the Gaza Strip, though that could change in light of this recent unity deal. Now, on Monday, the dominant Fatah faction and the Islamist Hamas group came to an unexpected agreement to reunite, a first such move in years, spinning the peace talks due to expire next Tuesday into uncertainty. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did leave a window of opportunity open, though, telling U.S. broadcaster MSNBC that things could change if Palestinian President Abbas changes his mind. And that wraps your look at the international headlines we're following this morning.
Now, although it's been over a week since the tragic Sewol-ho ferry accident, the incident is still fresh in everyone's mind. And throughout the time of mourning, many sports teams and athletes pay tribute to those that lost their lives or are still missing. While it was a very difficult time for many of the baseball players to play ball during times like this, all the KBO teams pay tribute by wearing a yellow ribbon on their arm sleeves. For the Tusan Bears, they were one of the first teams to pay tribute to those affected by the accident with the words "Busas Haenghwan," which means come back safely, on their helmets and caps. For the K-League Classic teams, all the players wore black armbands on their arms to remember those that lost their lives in this tragic accident. Of course, another way to pay tribute to those that lost their lives or are still missing was through a moment of silence. And it wasn't just here in the nation that athletes held a moment of silence, but in the U.S. as well. With Lee Hyun-jin taking the mound for the LA Dodgers on Tuesday night against the Philadelphia Phillies, the team decided to hold a moment of silence and remember those that lost their lives in the Sewol-ho ferry accident. And during this year's Boston Marathon, which was already emotional with the event taking place a year after the Boston Marathon bombing, 60 Korean runners who were participating in the event held a moment of silence before beginning their race. Of course, one way that the fans of all sports can have fun is through different events that the teams or the athletes hold. But all that was, of course, canceled as everyone felt it wasn't right to hold such events during times like this. While Korean baseball has been recently in the spotlight for all the flashy first pitch ceremonies, all of those events were canceled, and all the events that take place during the game were canceled as well. Not to mention, no loudspeakers were used during the cheering. Meanwhile, Kim Yeon-ah, who was set to reveal her limited edition retirement medals, which was set to go on sale, was canceled as well, as Kim Yeon-ah and her agency felt it just wasn't the right time for it all. And lastly, while the athletes themselves weren't able to go out to the scene of the accident to help out with the rescue, they made donations to help out in any way possible. Some of the athletes include Lee Hyun-jin and Kim Yeon-ah, who each donated 100 million won, or roughly $96,000. Now, all the KBO managers, led by manager Ryu Jung-il of the Samsung Lions, gathered money to donate a similar amount, with more donations coming in from other teams and athletes all around the world. Now, of course, while it was a very hectic time for everyone here in the nation, everyone had the Sewol-ho ferry victims and family in their thoughts and prayers throughout this time. And that's going to wrap it up for me. And once again, our thoughts and prayers go out to the victims and their family during this time. And with that said, see you guys again for your sports needs.
And time now for news sum up. During this sad time, the nation is coming together to show solidarity and to provide support for the families of the victims in the online community as well.
That's right. Thousands of volunteers are also down in Jindo now to do whatever they can to help them out. And it's not just Koreans that are taking part. For more, let's go over to our Seo Mi-sorang at the digital room. Good morning, Mi-sorang.
Good morning. 9 days have passed since the horrific Sewol-ho ferry's tragedy. But we're also struggling to come to terms with it. And despite this great sadness and despair, many people have rolled up their sleeves to offer assistance and condolences to those directly affected. Let's have a look. The Yellow Ribbon campaign has quickly gained momentum, but volunteer workers supplying kebabs at the Jindo Gymnasium were initially met with criticism. Yesterday was the last day of Nip-tide, and many looked up the significance of this, as well as news of actor Kim Soo-hyun donating just under $300,000 towards relief efforts. Meanwhile, over in Japan, US President Barack Obama met up with his Japanese counterpart Shinzo Abe in a bilateral summit. Let's go back to the first two listing there, starting off with the Yellow Ribbon campaign. Many people, both at home and abroad, have supported the Yellow Ribbon as a sign of optimism and hope for those still missing in the Sewol-ho ferry sinking. Various versions of the Yellow Ribbon have been adopted as profile pictures on social network and instant messaging services, while others have pinned the ribbon to their clothing. They could also be seen tied around trees and lines in public places with messages of hope written on them. It is thought that the Yellow Ribbon originated in World War II when women would tie the ribbons around trees to wish the safe return of family members fighting in the war. In the current Sewol-ho ferry tragedy, it is used to signify a wish for the safe return of those still unaccounted for. A slogan often attached to the ribbon reads, "A small movement for a big miracle." It is no longer a small movement, as we are all praying for that miracle. Moving on to our next issue, kebab vendors volunteering at the Jindo Gymnasium have been met with initial criticism. Let's see why. A group of Turkish and Korean volunteers set up a kebab stand yesterday morning with a banner that read, "We pray for the repose of the Sewol-ho ferry victims and for the safe return of the missing. Your brother country, Turkey." The group wished to be of assistance by offering free kebabs, and a queue of people quickly formed around the stand. However, what was meant as an act of goodwill was initially met with unforeseen criticism, the main complaint being that the strong smell of meat was inappropriate in the current atmosphere of mourning and disrespectful to the victims' families, who have more or less been unable to eat due to sheer sorrow and despair. In response, the vendors stressed their positive intentions, that they didn't mean any harm. In the end, both sides saw that it was a misunderstanding due to cultural differences and that no ill feelings were intended by either side. The volunteers have distributed all the portions that they had prepared, their actions appreciated by many around the country. That's it for today's News Sum Up. Everyone, please take care. I'll be back on Monday.
And still to come, in the face of overwhelming sadness and concern, help from across the country continues to pour in at Jindo Island to support the grief-stricken families. From endless relief supplies at the local post office to laundry service volunteers, help is there.
And with no news of any additional survivors since search and rescue operations began, many are now turning their eyes and focus to those who made it off the ferry before it sank, families of the victims, and others who were affected by this tragedy.
Right, there is mounting concern about the survivors and those left behind who have to deal with the aftermath of this tragic incident. And to help bring a sense of normalcy back to their lives, several measures have been put out. Let's take a look.
He made it out of the sinking ferry. But the vice principal of Danwon High School, soon after being rescued, took his own life, unable to carry the weight of the students he lost. Endless tears of the families who lost their loved ones, and heart-wrenching stories, and the nation in mourning. A survivor from a school trip accident from 14 years ago recently shared a message saying, "Do offer help to survivors before they suffer from guilt," putting attention on how to help the survivors and families of the victims. Danwon High School resumed classes on Thursday and will gradually transition to normal class hours. But some worry that it may be too soon and too much for the students. According to psychological experts, though, one of the ways to help students recover is to resume normal activity.
The students need to be at school so they can remove themselves from isolation, and as they mingle with their peers, they need to be given the opportunity to express their difficulties so that they can get closer to their friends.
But even after classes resume, the third-grade seniors began classes, and next week, the first-year students will return to get back into their cycle, with counseling set as the priority. Meanwhile, Korea University Ansan Hospital, where 74 of the surviving students are receiving treatment, announced it will provide special therapists for the students.
Because the trauma is continual, the situation fluctuates. Even if given their current condition, they are medically allowed to leave the hospital. It can change depending on a number of factors, including what their families think or whether they have a support system. So we need more time to decide whether each and every person is fit to leave.
Measures for support and help do not end at the surviving students. It extends to families of the victims, including their siblings.
We looked into how many siblings are affected by the accident, and within the 33 schools in Ansan, we came up to roughly 140. Aside from those who can receive support from their relatives, we are providing 40 students with meals and taking care of them all day to help them get by.
The government also decided to provide aid for physical and psychological treatment for the passengers, family members, as well as Danwon High School students, teachers,
and rescue workers. Not only that, the Ministry of Strategy and Finance also designated Jindo County in Jeollanam-do Province and Ansan in Gyeonggi-do Province as special disaster zones, which will provide them with compensation and aid for re-establishing their livelihoods. Depending on the needs, the ministry plans to disperse financial aid even before all details are finalized. Various measures are being initiated to help survivors and others affected by the accident, especially for the students at Danwon High School. And now, more measures to help all other survivors will need to be discussed to aid in recovery and support.
Now, down in the Jindo area, heading into the 10th day, many families of the missing and rescue workers remain on site, and there are also countless number of volunteers still working around the clock. Im Geun-hye joins us with this story. Good morning to you.
So with each passing day, these families are just continuing to grow ever so wary, waiting for news about their loved ones. And so the people of Korea have really stepped up to the plate in this incident, and they've been pouring in relief from across the country. And so we were able to look at some of these helping hands. Let's see. With so many people praying for a miracle down in Jindo, an endless stream of volunteers have descended on the area to help families of the missing and rescue workers. The local culture center has been flooded with relief supplies pouring in from across the country. Currently, more than 625,000 goods have come in, including daily necessities, such as toothpaste, shampoo, soap, food, and water.
A lot of high schools and mothers are sending in things from all over the country and also from overseas.
And on the boxes they come in, many have written messages of hope and prayers for the families of missing passengers, touching the hearts of many. These letters are sent to Pyeongmugang Harbor and Jindo Gymnasium, and they're put up where families of the victims can see them, in hopes of giving them some much-needed support. To sort the stream of goods, post office employees and volunteers have even given up their weekends to lend a helping hand.
There's so much coming in. I started work the day before yesterday, but it's not just this. There's so much over there in the warehouse as well. We are sorting things so they can go where needed.
There are 244 groups and more than 5,000 volunteer workers in the Jindo area, ranging from young students to adults, all coming together to help, and even more continue to come to the site. Hot meals for the families of the missing are also being served here, starting from the early morning hours, a service being offered by volunteer groups to make sure people can get whatever energy and comfort they may need.
People tell us that even knowing that we come from the same city, Ansan, gives them some comfort. That's why we're down here to help serve them food.
Meanwhile, as the desperate wait drags on for many with no good news surfacing, medical volunteers are also on standby at the gymnasium and the harbor.
With all the grief they are going through, many have trouble with digestion.
It's not only medical supplies they are offering, but emergency treatment and even therapy. These volunteers remain close by the families to make regular checkups. For families who haven't been able to change into fresh clothes since the accident that happened more than a week ago, volunteers are also providing help in the form of laundry. They collect clothing and other items from the families and wash and dry their clothes, carefully returning them back to their owners, fresh and clean. These supplies from all over the nation and volunteers on site are helping the families cope with each unbearable day, offering them the support and comfort that they so desperately need.
It's quite moving to see the scene of compassion and sympathy, and roughly 70% of the supplies that arrive in the Jindo area are from schools across the country, and there are handwritten letters from middle school and high school students who are writing in hopes of consoling the families of the victims, and the Jindo County and the Ansan City are doing something about it.
So the post offices in these areas are offering their services for free, actually. So over the next 3 months, they said that any packages marked with relief supplies will be picked up and sent at no cost.
And the number of families remaining in the gymnasium has dropped a lot because the death toll has exceeded the number of missing now. But we are seeing these families, the health conditions of these families deteriorating, and we hear that there are medical volunteers on site from 15 different countries across the nation. Could you just tell us more about them?
Right, so these teams, these medical volunteers are made up from personnel from internal medicine, family medicine, and even psychiatric specialists. And so they're all waiting on site, rotating in and out in 4-day shifts at the Pengmokang Harbor as well as the Jindo Gymnasium in order to help out anybody they need.
Okay, so 15 hospitals that have sent in reinforcements. We're talking about medical personnel, but this might not be one of the first things that you do think about, but we did see in the report that there are people collecting laundry, providing the people there with fresh sheets.
Right, so these volunteers are going around the gymnasium looking for families who have put up signs indicating that they would like their clothes cleaned, and so they would take the clothes, clean them, and return them to the families. And so, I mean, these seem like minor things, but they're hoping that these things will add up and provide any comfort that they can for these families that are really grieving at this time and waiting for any news.
All right, well, thank you very much for joining us today with this report, Uni.
My pleasure.
You call me out upon the waters, the great unknown, where feet may fail, and there I find you in the mystery, in oceans deep, my faith will stand.
Cosas, lo que parecía no importante, son las que más invaden mi mente al recordarte. Ojalá pudiera devolver el tiempo para verte de nuevo, para darte un abrazo y nunca soltarte. Más comprendo que llegó tu tiempo, que Dios te ha llamado para estar a su lado.
Those were more videos from our viewers from abroad, one from the United States and the other from Colombia. We thank you once again.
Thank you. And before we go, we will connect back with our Shin Se-min at the News Center for a recap on the latest of the Sewol-ho ferry disaster investigation. Now, Se-min, any changes over the past hour or so?
No, not yet. The number of missing stands at 121 and the confirmed deceased at 181. Search and rescue operations will continue today to make the most of the favorable conditions as the forecast shows current will gain speed over the weekend. Now on to the the latest about the ongoing investigation, it looks like all 15 rescued crew members, including the captain Lee Jun-seok, that escaped the ferry will face criminal charges. Now, 11 have already been charged with negligent homicide while violating maritime law, with the remaining 4 under investigation as suspects. Comments made by some of the crew members are causing quite a stir as well. One testified that crew members, including himself, were in a room less than 10 meters away from where the passenger cabins were right before they fled the ship, which clearly suggests they did not follow the standard protocols to help passengers escape. Now that's all for me here at this hour. Back to you.
Thank you, Semin, for that. And as conditions are expected to worsen throughout the day and the weekend forecast is not looking its best in the Jindo Island area, we do hope for a speedy recovery and the safety of the rescue personnel as well.
That's right. Korea Today will be back on Monday at 7. Do stay tuned to Arirang News for more updates on the ferry disaster throughout the weekend. See you Monday morning.
Goodbye.